Okay. Hello, world. We are back again. Welcome, programmers. Welcome, music lovers. Welcome to Coding Coda. We are streaming live from Boston, Massachusetts this evening, like we do every Sunday. My name is Joseph Parzell. I am a software developer and an app publisher. My friend on guitar this evening is Eric Gaudette. Welcome to episode number 7 of season 1. Here's our season 1 abstract. We are almost done with season 1, which we are learning how to create an Alexa skill that accesses your messages in Microsoft Teams. We do that using Microsoft Graph. So we are on episode 7, Graph Continued. Here's the technical specification for today's episode. We will do a quick introduction to Code and Coda and do a 5-minute recap of last week's episode. And we'll go ahead and finish up with what we started last week, which was basically setting up our Alexa skill to connect to Microsoft Graph via an Azure app. And the next step in the process was to consent to some scope requests, and we were going to do that through our Alexa app on our phone. Before we do that, though, let's do a quick introduction to Code and Coda. Of course, this Season 1 of Code and Coda, creating an Alexa skill that connects to Microsoft Teams, was my Teams Thursday New England presentation. The event was canceled, first postponed from April to June, and then canceled, unfortunately. So, along with the help of my friend Eric on guitar, we decided to create Code and Coda, which would be a way for me to present the information that I had for Teams Thursday. While we've been going through some of these episodes, I learned some new things each week, and people seem to be having some fun, so I hope you keep coming back to join us each Sunday for Code and Coda. Some other events going on in the area. Don't forget, we have Granite State Code Review Nightly each weeknight at 9 p.m. Lots of fun hanging out with that group, especially when Andreas comes in at 10:04. Save the date for November 14th, 2020. That's Granite State Code Camp. The call for speakers will be happening soon for that. In other news, Boston baseball will have their home opener this Friday, the 24th. Yes, I said that correctly. We are in July, and the home opener is this week. So, keep your eyes open for that. Season is starting. And I have almost struck out. I'm 0 for 2 trying to go see that comet out there, but I can't seem to catch a glimpse. So hopefully before that comet leaves our view, I'll be able to catch a glimpse. Before we get started, Let's say hello to our special guest. Remember to press that mute microphone button on your Alexa device. Alexa, how are you doing this evening?
You caught me in the middle of doing the hokey pokey.
Again?
So I'm all turned around.
She does the hokey pokey every Sunday night, I guess. Let's see if she's got a good music joke for us this evening. Alexa, music joke.
Why did the Beatles always lose at tennis? Because they thought that all you need is love.
The Beatles always lose at tennis because they thought all you need is love. Meaning 0, of course, which in tennis is not a good score. Well, thank you, Alexa. We are gonna mute you now. Let's go ahead and get started with our recap from last week's episode, part 1 of Graph, episode 6. If you remember, we looked at Graph Explorer and checked out some of the URLs that we will need to access when we are trying to find information from Microsoft Graph. We created a public application in Azure, select all the scopes, and then copied most of that information to our Alexa skill on our Alexa dev console. Let's go ahead and take a look at those slides from last week. Almost forgot. I guess I better ask Alexa for a countdown timer, 5 minutes. Alexa, set timer, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, starting now.
Okie doke, here we go. So like I mentioned, we looked at Microsoft Graph Explorer. That's a website that Microsoft has developed and allows you to see how Microsoft Graph works. You can log in with your Office 365 user account. Once you log in, you see that you are logged in up here on the left-hand side. And then down here at the bottom are where all of our URLs are that we're interested in. The first one we tried to run was the /me URL, and you can see the JSON data that we get as a response. So we started parsing through some of that data. We started looking through some of the other commands like my joined teams. In order for us to access that information, remember that we need to set up these permissions here and consent to some scopes. So what are those scopes that we need to consent to? Well, those are the 4 scopes right there. Those are the scopes that we need to consent to in order to read messages from Microsoft Teams via Microsoft Graph. All right, so once we found those scopes in Graph Explorer, you can see there we found the group read all, but we didn't consent. First, we tried to access that data, and I know that we were trying to get some of these other URLs to work here, join teams, channels, and messages. Once we finally did try to get those messages, I know somewhere in here, there we are, we got an error message because we did not consent. The next step of last week's episode, we created a public app in Azure. So before we went to Azure, remember, we went and finally consented to that scope. Here's the message that it gave us. We were able to click accept and finally get the JSON data we were looking for. Remember, we were looking for our list of teams. Here's our messages. Here's a message that I sent to Eric from our Coda team. Now over to the Azure portal, you can see that I registered a new application that anybody with an ID can use. Here's all the information that comes along with your newly registered app, all of the endpoints. Remember, we create a new secret and copy that secret information, because once you navigate away, you don't get to see that information anymore. The next thing we did was configure the scopes. So in this next section under Microsoft Graph, we searched for all of the scopes that we need to consent to, added the 4, and then went to the developer console to link up our new Azure skill to, Azure app to the Alexa skill. So in the Alexa skill, we come to the account linking section that's under models and go back to our Azure skill to grab our information, our app ID, our endpoints, secret, put all of that information into our Alexa skill, including the scopes that are required. When we click save, we are done linking our Alexa skill to our Azure app. And what that means is, with one more step, our Alexa skill will have access to information in Office 365 via Microsoft Graph. But first, before our Alexa skill can access that information, we need to log in to the Alexa skill and consent to these scopes. We do that via the Alexa app on our phone. That's what we're going to be doing today. That is the end of the recap of last week's slides. Alexa, how much time is left on the timer?
You have 20 seconds left on your
I
5-minute
got 20
timer.
seconds to spare. Alexa, stop timer.
5-minute timer canceled.
All right. Well, that was our recap. Before we go ahead and start part one here, why don't we go ahead and take a quick peek back in at Eric. Alright, well, let's go ahead and get through this first part. We can go ahead and breeze through here. Not much code. What I have next are some screenshots from my phone. Basically, with my phone, I have the Alexa app downloaded to my phone. Since I logged into the Alexa app with the same email address that I'm using for my Alexa developer console, all of these skills that you're creating are going to now be available on your phone, which is nice for testing purposes like we're doing now. So in the Alexa app on our phone, we will be logging into Office 365, consenting to the permissions that are requested, and then I'll go ahead and show you how an access token is created and sent in the request from Alexa to your web application. Just a quick peek back at our developer console here. We have our custom intent, which was called get teams. Now, if you remember from a couple of episodes ago, that intent was not running correctly. There were some issues with my user account, so I just kind of recreated the skill with this custom intent. Remember, we had some utterances here And so now, after building my skill with this custom intent, you can see that I can type in the invocation phrase, which is code in Coda. You see the response is hello world, launch requests, and then good afternoon. When I type in get teams, I get intent requests back. So our code knows that when we say get teams, we have an intent request being activated. Now, if you notice, it says good afternoon. That's because I've updated the code since last week, and instead of returning the time zone, if you remember it said America/New York, for a .NET user group, GraniteState.NET user group, I went ahead and updated the skill here so that our code now responds with the appropriate greeting. You can see our JSON request This is the JSON that's being sent to the web application, so you can see the request type is an intent request, and also sent with this information is the name of the intent that we are requesting. So if you say any of those 5 or so utterances, get teams, get my list of teams, any of those utterances will start an intent request for the get teams intent and send that request to your web application. Also remember, we are using information sent by Alexa such as access tokens. We are using these access tokens because we need to get information from other external servers, and with the access token, we can access information that's kept under security and only can be accessed by certain people. It's basically a password. We used that access token to access the user settings of the device to get the time zone of the device, and with that information we had the get time zone function here. Well, I went ahead and added another function that converts the time zone and then returns good morning, afternoon, or good evening. If you use the testing console, you can run any command from the testing console. So when I asked what time is it from the testing console, Alexa responded with the time and actually said, have a good afternoon. So Alexa is kind of doing the same thing we are here, sending a nice personalized greeting. Did not realize that Alexa would respond that way. All right, well.
Sorry, I don't know that. If you have a minute, I can show you a few things I can do. Do you want to hear more?
No, thank you.
Okay.
I always forget to mute Alexa the second time after I tell all of you guys to mute Alexa. So back to the original part 1 of this episode, the account linking. Remember, we came into the account linking section and we added all of our Azure app information, which included the authorization URIs and all of that. The next step is going to be to consent as a user to our skill. We're going to do that via the phone. To make it easier to see the app on the phone, what I'm doing here is I'm actually going to put an icon with our skill. So I'm just going to click on the distribution tab of our developer console here and scroll down. When you scroll down, you can add some icons. You can see that I've added the Coda icon to our skill, and this way when we open it up on our phone, it's more recognizable. So the next step, let's log in with Office 365 to our skill. Here's what it looks like when you open the skill, and what we're gonna go ahead and do is click on the menu button in the top left. That will open up the menu. From here, in your Alexa app on your phone, you can click on Skills and Games. Here's the screen that it opens. What you want to do from here is click on Your Skills. Once you open up the Your Skills tab, you'll see at the top there's 10 enabled, one that's updated, and then to the right, if you scroll to the right, you'll see that we have some skills in development. Here are the skills that we are working on in our developer console. There is the Coda skill, which says account linking required. So if we tap on that skill, the next screen also says account linking required. To link the account, you click on Settings. Again, it just says account linking required. What this is really asking us to do is log in with our Office 365 account and consent to the scopes necessary so that the skill can access Microsoft Graph and in turn our data. So when I click on that link account, here's what comes up next. You can see here this app would like to, and then those are the 4 scopes that we require. Once you click on accept, well, I did that, and unfortunately I had forgotten one more step in the process of linking our skill, and that's actually setting up the redirect values. Not only do we need to take information from our Azure app and put it into our Alexa skill, we need to take information from our Alexa skill and put it into our Azure app. What is that information? Good question. Well, let's go ahead back to our Alexa developer console to the account linking section. When you scroll down, notice Alexa redirect URLs. There's 3 there. We're going to take those 3 URLs, come back over to our Azure app, and notice a section here, redirect URIs. That's exactly what we're looking for. So once we click on redirect URIs on the next screen, we will click on add a platform, and we will add web type of platform. Now, I don't really quite get all of this, but you know, after some trial and error and going through some documentation, this is what we end up with. We have those 3 redirect URLs now associated with our with our Azure app. And so I save our Azure app. And when I try to go back and consent to restart the process, well, unfortunately my phone thinks I already consented, which is an issue. This may be an issue if you're a developer creating an app that needs to work on this flow process of granting permissions and requiring consent of scopes. What happens is you might consent, but down the road you might want to revoke those permissions of consent. The way to do that in Office 365 is pretty easy, is you can come up to this URL here, myapplications.microsoft.com. And you can see at the top left it says My Apps. When I found the Alexa skill app, you can see here are the permissions I consented to, the 4 scopes. And so what I need to do in order to complete my testing is revoke the permissions. Once I do that and go through the whole process of accepting the permissions required through the phone app, you can see now the Alexa skill has been successfully linked. So our Alexa skill now has been linked to Office 365 via my own Office 365 account. That means the Alexa skill can now access Microsoft Graph. So the way that it does that, if we come back now to our testing console, type in our invocation phrase, we get a response, but notice the request that is sent is a little bit different here. Before we were using the API access token to access the Amazon Alexa servers to get the time zone of the device. Well, in this case, for Office 365 and Microsoft Graph, we're given a different access token. That access token is stored under the user property of the system object here. So this request is being sent to our web application with an access token. That access token is basically our password to access information in Microsoft Graph. So we don't need to do any kind of security consent or logging in with the web application. It's all done already through the Alexa app. The next step will be to take that request, grab that new information from the request, the access token. We're also going to grab the intent details and run code based on the intent that is requested by the user. Before we do that, let's take another break, check in on Eric. Looks like we have a new viewer for this week. How's it going, Scott? Good to see you. All right, let's get into some C#. Isn't this why we all come to Code and Coda, to look at some code? So again, the next step is to parse this JSON here. What I've done back in our C# application in the home controller, I've just added another global variable here called graph access token. And down in our index method here, this is the method that we are using to process the request. Over here on line 64, what I'm doing is I'm getting the user property out of the system object, and then within the user object is another property called access token. So I'm getting both of those pieces of information. Remember, this all comes from our Alexa post request object that we've been working with. So we're just getting a few more pieces of information here. And once we get that new access token, go ahead and store that into our global variable. Now I've moved this speak variable to the top because what we're going to be doing next is generating a more custom response based on the intent that is being sent to us. And the way that we decide the type of action to take is, first we can look at the request type. So down here in our code, after I get the access token, I've added a switch code block. And the request type string, well, that comes, remember from previous episode, we're getting the request type from the type object here, from the request object. So we're just kind of drilling down through the information. The request type here, one request type is launch request, and that is going to be case sensitive, remember there. And if it's a launch request type, what we're going to do is send back a greeting that says, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Next, however, if it's not a launch request, well, what other kind of request could it be? It can be an intent request. And if it is an intent request, there is more information that we look at. Within the intent section of our request is a property called name. So within our switch block here, we can create a second switch case. So we create a second switch code block. Basically what we're saying here is if it's a launch request, go ahead and respond with hello world. If it's an intent request, then what we need to do is drill down into the information a little bit more. Like I mentioned, we're going to get the property called name. Once we have the name of the intent request, we create another switch code block, and based on that name of the intent, we will proceed differently. So if this is, and I notice that this is got a minor typo here. So within this switch block, we're determining what type of intent is being requested by the user. We have the help intent, which is a default intent from Amazon, and if we get the help intent, we just say, please visit the website for help. Otherwise, if it's a get teams intent request, well, what we're going to do is return some information after we get the teams from Microsoft Graph. So I created a little bit of a signature there for get teams. We're going to use IntelliSense to help us create that method. And I've updated that method just a little bit because we need this method to be an asynchronous function. That's because we're going to, within this method, be calling an API. And the API we're going to be calling is the Graph API. Remember this from before. Here are the URLs that we will be calling to get information from Microsoft Graph, information about your teams and your messages. So within our get teams function here, I kind of have done the same thing as before. When we were getting information about the time zone, create a new HTTP client object, add the URL information. Now, a lot of this is kind of hard-coded. This probably could be done a little bit cleaner. One thing to notice, under the default request headers and authorization property of the HTTP client object, we are adding an authentication header value. We're adding a bearer token, and the token that we're adding is the graph access token that we retrieved from the request. So this HTTP client object, we pass it the graph URL and an access token, which is basically a current password. And then we say, get the endpoint called me/joined teams. You remember that from Graph Explorer. And what that's going to do is get a list of my teams. We will need to parse through that data a little bit further. We won't get through that today, but we will take a little bit of a closer look. The way that we can execute this code now is with our get page of our web application. Now notice here, you remember that we have a text box here at the top for API access token. That's because the access token changes on a regular basis. We can get this access token from the developer console and then copy it over here to run it locally. I've added a second field here for the graph access token, which changes more frequently than the Amazon API access token. And in order to run an intent request, I've created a second button here, which launches an intent request via JavaScript rather than a launch request. We'll get more into that JavaScript in the next episode here. But just keep in mind that through our development environment here, we are sending now an intent request to our web application, which through the switch code block has determined we are sending a get teams request. It's sent a call to the get teams function here, and within the get teams function we sent a request to the Graph API for the joined teams endpoint. I put a little breakpoint there before exiting the function so you can see if we take the return data and open it in the JSON visualizer. Here we are. This is what's sent back to us. I am a member of 9 teams on my tenant. So the data was sent back to us as an array. And when I open up the last item in the array, you can see Coda is one of the teams that I'm a member of. So we've gone through the process of creating a custom intent which tells our code, hey, we want to get a list of teams. So in our code, we've gone in and grabbed the graph access token and have run a very simple API request to the Graph API servers. And we got a list of teams back from those servers. Now, we haven't made this very nice looking and we haven't gotten our messages yet. But what we will be doing is using that ID from this response to next get a list of channels for this team, and within that list of channels we can get our messages. And that will be the next episode. In 2 weeks we will have our season finale. We will not be having an episode next Sunday. We're going to take 1 week off. But in 2 weeks, on August 2nd, we will have episode number 8, season 1 finale. Looking forward to that big time. We will probably run the episode a little bit long. Hopefully we can hang out a little bit more. Drink some more coffee, look at some more code. We're going to do some code cleanup on our response in the next episode. And of course, listen to some more great music from our friend Eric. Until then, though, 2 weeks from now, we will see you at the Season 1 finale. Thanks for coming tonight. This is Coda, streaming live from Boston, Mass. Take care.